So here we go. We're live again. So this is the big one. This is immigration and the Irish nation. So I've been out and about for a week or two now. I've been on Galway Bay FM. I've been on Kinvara FM, and this is what I've been discussing. So we've knocked at about 3,000 doors at this point, and every third or fourth door that you come to will be either answered by a Polish person or a Brazilian or an African person. So we've a bit of experience at this now. We have been talking about immigration to immigrants. We've been talking about immigration to Irish people. So this is what it says on the leaflet. It says, we will support Western democracy, secure borders, integrated traditional communities, and we will oppose globalism, multicultural supremacy, and mass migration. So that's quite a challenge. I mean, what we have discovered is that immigrants or foreigners or whatever non-nationals, whatever people draw distinctions about, how they like to be termed. Blow-ins. I suppose I'm a blow-in. I wasn't always comfortable with that description, but I'm quite happy with it now. I'm quite happy with where I come from and the people that I belong to, and it seems to be a lot of people, Polish people, Brazilian people, African people, are able to who understand their position in Irish society and quite happy to talk about the relationship between themselves. And in fact, it's a relief for them to do so. What we're discovering is, in fact, that it's Irish people that find it hard to talk about immigration, and Irish people haven't really separated the issues out and are not really fluent in discussing the new situation we find ourselves in, with almost 20% immigration in 20% non-nationals in 20 years. When you consider that it's taken the UK about 100, well, certainly since the 60s, let's say, so it's taken the UK 60 or 70 years to get to the same place that it's taken Ireland to get to in 20 years. And, are we going to repeat all the mistakes and failures that have happened in different parts of the world, say in Sweden or the UK, where, when I first started into politics, I was marching for Nelson Mandela. And, I really believed that I remember the march to Hyde Park, and just before Nelson Mandela was released. And, I sincerely believed that justice and fairness for South Africans was an important thing for me. And, I was marching not just with people in London, but people all over the world. Do I regret that? No, I don't. But I have to say I've learnt the lessons of that. And one of the lessons is that the reciprocation of goodwill that you hope for may not actually happen. That there may be a mixed result of your goodwill. So Nelson Mandela got in and he did great for a long time. Now we're starting to see a different situation developing, and we're seeing some regretful things happening. For example, the South African farmers of Dutch and British extraction finding themselves attacked on their farms. that South Africa's rape and murder rate has gone through the roof. It's the most dangerous place in the world to live. And not only white farmers are getting attacked, but also Nigerians are being killed in South Africa. So, reciprocation is a big part of the relationship between peoples, that the goodwill you invest is returned to you. And there are no guarantees of that. And I think Irish people assume, like I did when I started out marching for Mandela, that the goodwill that we offer people will be returned to us. But in Sweden, that hasn't been the case. And when I marched for Mandela in London, the non-national population of London was about 30%. Now, 30 years later, the non-national population of London is 60%. So that's not what I was marching for. I was marching for peace in South Africa and justice in South Africa. I wasn't marching for the whole world to come and live with me in London or in Ireland. And so, this is where the economics come into it, that the big business people and the financiers see an advantage in this for themselves, and they take advantage of people's goodwill to disadvantage them, really, to create competition for housing and for jobs, and that their goodwill is then used against them to reduce their living standards and the safety of their communities. So this is something which I've had to unfortunately accept. It wasn't what I hoped for, but that's what's happened, So I think all of us, it's a journey. It's been a journey. I think today Irish people like to think of themselves as benevolent, as always yielding, as open, friendly, and all those things. We like to think of ourselves. A lot of people imagine themselves back in Alabama with Rosa Parks on the bus, and that's the kind of approach that this is the innocence that people are addressing, that the position that people are addressing immigration from today. And look, we'd all like to be doing the right thing with Rosa Parks back in the 1950s. And who knows what we would have done in those situations. But Hollywood has shown us and told us the stories, and this is our the Irish conscience at the moment, that we have to always respond in that way. But listen, that was 70 years ago in Alabama. Today, this is Ireland, and we have no history of racial antagonism. We never went anywhere in the world and oppressed anybody. What we have is, when I was dealing with South Africa all those years ago, that was a result of Europeans going elsewhere in the world and resolving the conflicts that were created by that. But now what we're dealing with is resolving the conflicts that are created by other people coming from the rest of the world to here. And, this is our homeland. People say, Dave, you're a Christian. Don't you think that all the people in the world, that God wants all the people in the world to live together and be happy? Of course he does. But, there is order and boundaries that are set. In the Bible it says, when we are in heaven, we will neither be married nor given in marriage, and we'll all be like spirits before the Lord. Well, that's fine too. But for now, you can't date my wife. There are boundaries. In heaven, maybe it's a different story, but we're not in heaven now. We're in a fallen world which is faced with the challenge of evil. So there are boundaries and order that is set in place in order to stop stop corruption and stop disruption and all kinds of things from happening. So, order is created by boundaries, and we have a constitution. And the Constitution says what Irish is, and it says, who is entitled to live here. And people who come here from the rest of the world recognise that they are entering into a hierarchy and that they have a place in it, and that they want to talk about their place in Ireland. But what I think is really happening, what really drives the race argument in Ireland, is that there is an ideology around at the moment which wants a gender neutral, nation neutral, morality neutral vision of the world. And it sees itself as, international and cross-cultural and a world identity. But, we haven't consented to that. We are still a nation who is under a constitution. And by these people demanding that we accept their values against our own national values means what we have coined the term multicultural supremacy, that this global vision of the world takes supremacy over the national, the local, and our culture and our traditions and our identity. And that is supremacy in Ireland. That is what happens when somebody else comes and imposes their will and their vision on people who haven't asked for it, who haven't consented to it, and who are actually resisting it. But what happens with all empires is that, that resistance is opposed, and people are, the vision, the other vision, the international vision, is imposed on the local. And so that's what we're resisting at the moment. And that is really at the heart of what the problem is. Or what the conflict is, and why I've changed from a person who supported, I haven't really changed. I'm still doing the same thing, sticking up for people in their own countries to have justice and fairness. And when you see London, which is now 60% non-national, Birmingham, which is now just turned England's next biggest city, which is just turning 50% non-national at the moment. This is inexorable, and this is a policy driven by economics. Essentially, it's a big racket where your global financiers back housing development with funny money, and the money that they invent out of nowhere in the world. Build houses and put people from all over the world into high value economies in order to create rental populations, which they then which spend every penny they have on rent and services, and that all goes back to the big global financiers and all those people. So we're seeing a return of essentially landlordism. Ireland has really, when I look at the history of this, the return to landlordism immediately after our loss of sovereignty, which happened in 2010-ish. Also, when I look at the way the Vikings operated, this is exactly the wrong kind of migration pattern in Ireland. The post-Roman migration pattern worked in Ireland. It was enriching. St. Patrick, Niall of the Nine Hostages, whose mother was a Saxon, they established, these are two guys who had only one Irish parent between them, who established the basis of what is our Irish identity today. That was very successful. And the reason it was successful because Patrick and Niall worked for an Irish vision. Whereas the Romans wanted Ireland to become part of their vision. So they wanted Ireland to be in the service of a global international Roman vision. And that's why empire is resisted. But what Patrick and Niall did was they were strangers who served, well, they weren't that strange, but that they were coming from that kind of background, but yet they served an Irish vision. And this is what it's all about. It's not about who you are or what your background is. It's whose vision do you serve, and how does it affect the local people? How does it affect the indigenous population? And that's the same issue for, say, South Africa as it is for Ireland today. So let's see, how are we finding these guys let's go back to the Vikings. The Vikings essentially settled in the towns, which is the kind of pattern we're seeing today, and they traded in all the wrong things. They were exploitative. They were different religious practices. They imposed a different worldview. They had a vision of conquest. And there are people coming to Ireland now, not all of them, but there is definitely some that have a vision of conquest, and that has to be resisted, because we are not going to be conquered. And but the Vikings tried, and they were resisted, and they were, for all the trendies who loved the Viking culture and are all inspired by a pagan gang culture. These guys were hated and deeply resisted, and the heathen slave traders were, there was an intense conflict for a long time, and eventually the Irish got rid of them completely. I mean, they didn't want any shred of them left. Now, of course, there are Viking names left in Ireland, but they were not people who served the vision of conquest. In fact, many of them were conquered by Brian Boru and then joined his army and served after that an Irish vision. So we're talking about the kind of conquest that, or the kind of relationship between peoples on this island. The Normans were initially had a vision for conquest, but then became more Irish than the Irish themselves. And that mix of cultures was actually pretty good for the Irish, because we learnt a lot of successful technology for them. And in fact, the Burkas of Connacht in my local area, they ended up being the people who led the Gaelic world back against the Westminster and Whitehall and all these places. Well, whatever was going on, it was the Tower of London pretty much at that time. There wasn't a whole lot more to it, but let me think. So how are the guys talking to us at the doors? We really aren't having much. I mean, no foreigner has slammed the door in our face. No one has said you're racist. Get out of here. No, they want to talk, and they're quite happy to talk. And these are the kind of reactions we get from them. Remember, there was an African pastor, and so when you're talking to an African and your policy is that you want to close the borders, first of all, I say to him, well, we're the Trumps of Ireland. We actually want to see a lot of the policies that he has taken to preserve his culture and take his nation back. We want to see that here. He said, I love Donald Trump. And he said, I see that you're against abortion and you're against all this sex education in school. And for the Africans, that's more important to them. Our godless globalist culture frightens them. They don't like it. And, many of the Africans find this a real menacing thing about our culture, that we are so godless and so lacking in Christian morality. That's far more important to them than how we deal with the borders. And like I say to them, look, we want to hold immigration to 20%. And he finds that perfectly reasonable. He would expect that in his own country. Let's face it, in Nigeria, where a lot of the guys come from, Buhari has just signed an order last year that no Nigerian can give a job to a foreigner if a Nigerian is capable of doing that job. So these are territorial people who expect their territorial integrity to be upheld. So they really don't know what we're about. And I mean, honest to God, who knows what this globalist thing in Ireland is going to yield. I mean, we've had such change and nobody really knows where this is all going. So I think that the guys are only glad to talk about where this is all going. And of all the African guys I've talked to, some of them who were the first Africans or West Indians to come here, they see the value in protecting Irish culture. They don't want Ireland to become like Africa either. They don't want ghettos of African people where knife crime and acid attacks are a serious problem. And no, they like Ireland because it's not like that, and they don't want it to become like that. So, these are not issues of, where of prejudice. These are things that need to be talked about and concerns that people really matter to people. Now, the Brazilian guys, for them, it's all about, from what I've taught from the guys who've talked to me, it's about the race to the bottom. They may have legal status, and they're seeing guys who have illegal status come in and competing with them for the quite badly paid jobs. And they are also paying very high rents. So, the entirety of their wages is going every week. And, they are really under pressure. And, for them, the race to the bottom is the thing to avoid. So we may have 20% migration. I mean, they don't want 40% because they don't want to be competing against another 20% coming after them. Now, it might serve the global financiers to have everybody scrambling, everybody terrified of being made homeless, rushing to pay high rents just to have a roof over their heads, and glad to take any job that they have. But that's not actually fair on the Brazilians. It's not fair on the Irish either. So, they want to talk about when this all stops, because what we want is integrated communities. We want a moderate amount of people in Irish culture, so in Ireland, so an amount that we can actually manage. And the Polish guys, they're the best of the. Well, let's go back to the Brazilian guys. You just mentioned Bolsonaro, and they get a big smile across their face because they recognize that Bolsonaro has taken their country back, which is exactly what we want to do. They, very many of them are very fond of Bolsonaro and very admiring of what he's done. And they recognize in what we're trying to do the same thing. So let's go on to the Polish. The Polish, I think we're absolutely mad, in allowing the kind of migration into our country that they would never, ever tolerate. It worries them to see what we're doing to our cities because it's not the kind of environment that they've created for themselves in Poland. They haven't let anyone in, as far as I can tell, or broadly speaking, from outside the EU. No Muslims at all. And they're very proud that rape is not a problem and that the terrorist attacks are not a problem. As far as they're concerned, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And our open borders, globalist, yielded national culture frightens them. And it frightens, well, it worries me too. So the Polish and the Hungarians and the East Europeans generally are committed nationalists, traditionalists like we are. So from the Polish, the Africans and the Brazilians, you would think that closing the borders would be a big problem. But what we're finding at the doors, when you actually talk to people and don't infantilize them and treat them like poor little Rosa Parks on the bus needing protection from the big bad world, they don't recognize that as Ireland. Ireland is not like that. That's not. They know they're in a open, welcoming, safe, slightly. They're not fools. They know that our kind of what they call racism is more hidden. We're much better at hiding it, and but I'm not going to talk about racism because I don't think it's not the issue that I'm dealing with. Whatever racism is, I'm just talking about how people have responded to our policy of closing the borders. And but the people who do slam the doors in our face are the Irish, and that's happened maybe it wouldn't even be a handful of times, and there's some wonderful dramatic virtue signals which take place, and most of this is because they don't want to understand what we're trying to say, they don't want to talk, and they don't want to listen to what we're saying. They have a very Hollywood cut and dry version of who you are in relation to what happened to Rosa Parks in Alabama, 70 years ago. So well done, guys. The drama is fabulous, But what I'm actually saying is that if you're married, if a non-national is married to an Irish person, well done. Thank you very much. You've dedicated your life to an Irish person. You are at the heart of our community. You're integrated into the heart of our society, and your children are Irish. Their genealogy goes back to Cuchulainn, and we are separating the issues up. You are not a part of mass migration. You are a person who has done what has been happening for years and years and years in Ireland, which is that people have blown in and people have married in. And like with St. Patrick and Niall of the Nine Hostages, this is enriching, this is important. This is important function of communities, of nations, to have, an amount of interaction with other societies and exchanges of ideas and, mixing of the blood and all that. We are not against race mixing or any of those things. That we're not. This isn't Alabama we're dealing with. This is modern Ireland, and we've absolutely no problems with that, and that's normal. And to say that that's something to do with what we're about or why we want to close the borders is ridiculous. That's got absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about here. So there are also people who have blown in. People who have been here for a long time, 20 years, the first dark-skinned people to come here, and they found that people were, that it was a wonderful time to be in Ireland. And those people are saying, well, as there have been more and more people arriving, my relationship with the community has changed, that I am now just a face in the crowd, whereas once I was recognizable and known and distinguished. Now I'm just part of this economic event, and it's taken it's taken the relationship to a different place. So for those guys, I know it's been particularly difficult, and I think of some of my friends, who would be, or people I know well, guys who would be, from all around the world, people from India, Africa, who have been here for a long, long time. And, I know a lot of people who are maybe English or German or Swedish who've been here for a long time, and they are starting to feel that they're being more excluded, or that this that the rise of populism, or wanting to take our nation back to assert our identity, is excluding them. And I understand that, but if they are secure in their place with us, really, it's not something to worry about. Excuse me, Lil, can you leave me? I'm doing a live stream. No, the dog isn't here. Thank you. Right. So so those guys, people I know, and I carry them in my thoughts all the time, when I'm doing this. And I always try to keep my conscience clear with these guys, because I don't want to be found to be somebody who has treated them unfairly, or reinvented myself with regards to them. So the position I'm holding is that 20% migration is enough for Ireland, and I think most non-nationals are quite happy to accept that, and expect that, expect a limit somewhere. And my question to people who find the rise of populism, nationalism frightening: what percentage of the Irish population would you say is an acceptable maximum? It's a very difficult question to answer, and if you can't answer it, you're not taking responsibility for the Irish identity, for Ireland. You are not respecting Irish culture and identity. You are a multicultural supremacist, and you are putting yourself in conflict with traditional Irish, the Irish identity. So, if you are challenging Ireland in that way, if you are a person who is trying to be supremacist and imperialist over the Irish identity, remember, we haven't accepted this global vision. The last time we voted was in 2003, and 80% of us voted that Irish identity came through parentage, that entitlement to Irish citizen depended on where your parents were from, not where you were born. If you haven't got Irish parentage, according to the Irish Constitution, you don't have an entitlement to Irish citizenship. Now, and that's where we are. And your global ideas of what Irish is, your reinventions of what it is, are not accepted under the Constitution of Ireland. These are ideas which you're trying to impose without any